You spend years learning how to sound more employable, and then one day your real voice starts sounding less professional, even to you. That is the threat. Not just that work changes you, that the version of you that gets rewarded starts becoming easier to access than the one that actually lives your life. And this happens in ordinary places. LinkedIn, resume, interview prep, hiring filters, personal brand advice, reputation platforms, all the small professional systems that keep telling you to present your best self when what they usually mean is your safest one. So you clean things up, you rewrite your bio, you remove the opinion that sounds too sharp, you replace a real sentence with a cleaner one, you turn "I get obsessive about bad design" into detail-oriented. You turn "I don't work well with fake people" into values-transparent collaboration. You turn yourself into something a recruiter can scan without flinching. Now it is no longer theoretical. It is a laptop open at midnight. It is your LinkedIn profile glowing in a dark room. It is the cursor deleting a word that sounded too much like you. You've felt this before, and at first, none of this feels sinister. It feels adult, strategic, because there are real rewards for it. More callbacks, better reactions, fewer awkward silences, more people saying you seem polished, sharp, ready. That is what makes it dangerous. The version of you that wins is not obviously fake. It is just edited enough to be easy. And after a while, you are not just improving how you present yourself. You are learning which parts get the meeting, which parts get described as a strong fit. The other parts do not disappear. They just stop getting invited. You learn to smile through interviews in a very specific way. Warm, but not intense. Confident, but not difficult. Personal, but not complicated. You answer with stories that have already been pressure tested. Even your honesty comes with the edges sanded down. You didn't notice when it started. At some point, "Tell me about yourself" stopped being a question. It became a format. You learned the acceptable amount of ambition, the acceptable amount of struggle, enough to sound real, not enough to be inconvenient. Hiring software reads for match. Recruiters read for signals. Interviewers look for confidence, clarity, executive presence, culture fit. Your profile becomes a public product page for a person who is still supposed to feel private on the inside, but the line does not stay there for long, because repetition changes things. If you say the polished version often enough, it stops feeling like performance and starts feeling like language. Then, identity. Not because it is true, because it is the version that keeps working. You post something measured instead of something honest. You soften a thought before sending it. You delete a sentence because it could be misunderstood. You swap an opinion for a trait. That is not just communication. That is self-training. And the disturbing part is that most people around you will call it maturity. They will call it professionalism. They will call it growth. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it is just a cleaner form of self-erasure. Look at how people are judged. The person who sounds smooth gets described as leadership material. The person who speaks too directly gets called difficult. The person who says exactly what they think without packaging it gets treated like a risk, even when they are right. So the lesson becomes obvious. Not what is true, what is usable. That lesson follows you everywhere, into networking calls, into performance reviews, into about pages. You are told to build a personal brand, which sounds harmless until you realize it means reducing a life into a consistent surface. Not a self, a surface. Something people can remember and recommend without having to deal with the parts of you that change, contradict themselves, or still feel unfinished. And this is where the story gets worse, because now it stops being about work. You are alone. No recruiter, no hiring manager, no camera on, no audience. And you still catch yourself rewriting a thought in your head so it lands better. You feel the impulse to phrase even your private reactions in cleaner terms. Not, "I hate this," more like, "This no longer aligns." Not, "I'm lost," more like, "I'm in transition." That should bother you, because once the edit follows you into solitude, it is no longer presentation. It is starting to become your first language. The professional version of you was supposed to be temporary, a mode, something you turned on for interviews and turned off when the call ended. But now, it is showing up in places where there is nothing to win. You rehearse a text before sending it to a friend. You clean up a feeling before naming it to yourself. You describe your exhaustion in language that still sounds competent. You didn't plan for that. This is the micro shock. Not that you perform in public, that you started performing in private, and the performance still sounds more acceptable than the truth. Because the edited self does not just show up at work anymore. It starts handling the rest of your life. Conflict, friendship, dating. The moments when someone asks what is wrong and you answer with something neat instead of something true. You call yourself tired when you mean numb. You call yourself focused when you mean shut down. You call yourself strategic when you mean afraid. After enough repetition, it starts getting first access to your actual life. At some point, this became normal. You probably know the moment even if you never named it. A friend says something raw and messy and alive, and part of you envies them. Another part immediately sees why they would never make it through a panel interview. Or you hear someone answer a question too honestly, and you can almost feel the room close around them. Not because they were wrong, because they were expensive. That is the social lesson underneath all of this. Some versions of a person cost more than institutions want to pay for. So you become cheaper to hold. You simplify. You pre-correct. You make yourself easier to endorse, easier to hire, easier to explain. And because the rewards are real, the system never has to force you very hard. It just keeps rewarding the version that causes the least friction. That is why this does not feel like oppression. It feels like opportunity, which is worse, because a person can resist what attacks them. It is much harder to resist what keeps helping them succeed. And somewhere inside that success, something private starts getting weaker. Your real voice does not disappear all at once. It just starts sounding less useful, too blunt, too emotional, too specific, too difficult to move safely through rooms full of people deciding whether you are a good investment. So when it appears, you correct it. You hear yourself think something clear and ugly and alive, and another part of you steps in to clean the sentence. Not for truth, for tone, for optics, for future consequences. After a while, honesty does not feel brave. It feels expensive, because once your inner life starts passing through employability before it becomes language, you are no longer just managing a career. You are teaching yourself that your first reaction cannot be trusted until it has been made safer for other people. The self with polished answers, the self with professional warmth, the self with a better headline and cleaner story. That self starts feeling more credible than the one who is actually confused, angry, changed by things, still unfinished, still inconvenient. And that creates a very specific kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of being unseen, the loneliness of being slowly replaced by something that still uses your face, your name, your voice, and your achievements. You can feel it in small moments, when someone praises you for being composed and you know that what they really mean is edited. When your resume sounds more stable than your actual mind. When your profile looks coherent in a way your life no longer does. Because the danger was never that you would become fake. The real danger is that you become easier to reward than to know, easier to approve than to feel, easier to sell than to trust. And once that happens, the system does not need to silence your real self. You start doing it for them. You catch yourself treating your own unedited reactions like a problem to manage, your anger as unprofessional, your uncertainty as weakness, your real language as something that needs cleanup before it deserves to exist in public. Then, slowly, before it deserves to exist, even in private. That is the crack. A self can survive being hidden for a while. What it does not survive so well is being downgraded inside its own life, treated like a risk by the same person who was supposed to protect it. So the question is no longer whether the system changed you. It did. The harder question is what you now classify as excessive, embarrassing, reckless, or unsafe inside yourself simply because it does not match the version that keeps getting rewarded. Because the edited version is clean. It interviews well, it networks well, it posts well, it survives the scan, it gets the call back, and every time that version wins, something inside you learns the same lesson. Be clearer, be smoother, be safer, be easier to buy. Until one day, the most natural voice you have left is the one you built for evaluation. And the real one does not sound wrong because it changed. It sounds wrong because you trained yourself to hear it that way. If the edited version of you keeps winning, how long before the real one starts to feel like a liability?